This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Morning. Ethan.
How are you doing?
Good.
All right, so we'll jump into a couple articles for you. So the first one is a little update article, I guess. So I think this was like 3 years ago where the 6-year-old shot a teacher. That's right, a 6-year-old. Sometimes we hear a lot of like that would never happen to this young kid, but unfortunately it seems like more and more we're actually see that. So this was in Virginia, and so the assistant principal is actually on trial now. And this is because
it sounds criminal, right?
It sounds criminal, and it's because I think she had received some type of warnings that this kid might have a weapon, and to some extent kind of brushed it off, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And so now this is what she's dealing with 3 years later. So
yeah, so
crazy
there's
stuff.
You and I talked about this a little bit in pre-production, and I'm a little confused, but the significance here is that they are charging her with child abuse.
Yeah.
Felony child abuse. And specifically, they're saying that the category of child abuse they are using covers acts or omissions to act. So I'm a little confused because I don't have all of the details. But the interesting part here is criminal charges for acting or not acting in the best interest of the child. I'll kind of leave it at that because I think this is correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have any different recollection. I'm not aware of any cases. I don't remember of hearing of any cases where a school administrator or a school staff was charged criminally.
Yeah, not that I remember.
There's been a couple peripheral cases. When I say that, I mean there were cases where a couple administrators were charged criminally for not correctly using funds that were meant for safety, grant monies and so forth. There's been a couple of those, but not directly towards the act itself.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's been some administrative things, and there's been, of course, many administrators that were sued civilly, but I don't remember anyone being essentially charged criminally for inappropriately acting or not acting appropriately. So it'll be interesting to follow that one, and I'll have to try to explore that one a little bit and get some more details on the actual circumstances for being charged. But it was like 8 class.
Yeah, it was 8 counts.
8 counts of felony child endangerment. So that's significant.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was 8, and each count holds a sentence term up to 5 years. So I think it was like 40 years potential.
Yeah.
For not doing your job.
Would not want to be in her shoes.
But
that's for sure.
Even if she's acquitted, that's not a pleasant process to go through.
No, probably might be kind of hard to find a job in the same field in the future. All right, so the other news for you. So in Florida, Governor DeSantis has signed the HB 757. So this is basically expanding the Guardian program that was already there, but is expanding it to the higher education now. Basically, it's just what it's allowing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but it's allowing college campuses and all that to have a designated guardian that carries a weapon.
The interesting part about that is there's a significant difference in who we are trying to protect between the K-12 space and the higher education space.
Yeah, I mean, well, you got kids or More like young adults.
Young adults.
Yeah.
Theoretically, your students can now carry firearms if they're guardians.
Wait, I wasn't even thinking about that.
Right? If you qualify to be a guardian and you are a student at the school, I mean, both could be true.
Yeah, and every time it says it's talking about just trained individuals.
Yep. Right. But
so I mean,
okay.
to be like, you know, part of the guardian, it says you need to go through drug screenings, psychological evaluations, and a minimum of 144 hours of rigorous training. Do you think 144 hours is enough, Lee? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
That's 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks of time.
Yep. So 2.5 weeks of time.
I mean, you'd have to imagine someone who has the desire to be a guardian. I mean, I feel like they would have to have some like prior experience in handling a weapon. I don't imagine someone who's like not familiar with a weapon at all would want to be a guardian. That would not make sense to me. I feel like you'd be a lot less likely to see that.
Well, at some point, you have to go from everyone.
Yeah.
You have to go from not ever having handled a weapon to handling a weapon.
Sure.
Right.
At some point.
So, and the reason I say that is growing up, I had a friend whose dad was an FBI agent, and he took us out shooting one time. I shot his revolver like 6 shots. So I don't really count that as any sort of, that was like, I'm 10 years old and I get to shoot an FBI's gun, right? An agent's gun.
That's not really qualified as training by any means.
Right. So I essentially had 0 firearms training or extensive handling. I wasn't a hunter. I didn't go out and take safety courses. I didn't do anything. And then I went into law enforcement, right? The idea of wanting to be a guardian may supersede that, even the thought that I have to carry a firearm, but knowing that it's part of being a guardian, that makes sense. The mission might be more important than the equipment that you use, is what I'm saying. So people might want to be a guardian and then say, oh, I'm going to be a guardian. Well, that requires you to handle and own a firearm. Good on those people, but it does bring up some interesting dynamics, right? And those are, if the law allows it, then the schools will have to have policies around that. I always go back to this. If you have authorized weapons on campus for the purpose of security and safety, make sure that those people are well trained. They maintain their training. You have the policies to support their actions and the policies to discipline their actions if they fail to follow the good policies, right? And you have the ability to hold people accountable. I always go back to this, is I went into a profession where everyone knew that they had to carry a firearm. They knew it. That you cannot be a certified peace officer without carrying a firearm. So you know that that's going to be a deal. And yet we still had difficulty getting our people to train and qualify using firearms. We had to qualify every quarter and we had to show proficiency. And now you're going to put somebody out there who's not necessarily in that mindset, right? And we also know that the more you train with firearms, the better off you are. However, generally speaking, the people that need to hold to a very high standard, well, a lot of them will only meet the minimum. So if you say you have to qualify once a year, that's what they're going to do.
Right. You're going to have those people that don't go out and do anything above and beyond training and just go to the gun range and, every other weekend or whatever, once a month, and just,
or 2 weeks before qualification is coming up.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to meet the minimum and you're going to say, okay, you met the minimum, but the minimum doesn't necessarily mean you're prepared to act when needed. I said, I was in a profession where that was a requirement. We tested you once a quarter, but the expectation is that you would be ready when the need arose. Not against it, but it has to be administered properly to be successful. But the other part of that is there was additions to that law that
Yeah, it was
required uh, response plans and a couple other facets. Go
the
ahead.
law requires public colleges to create response plans for active assailants and making firing a weapon within 1,000 feet of a school a second degree felony.
Mhm.
So obviously I'm assuming that would
So,
not apply to your guardians if the need arose, but
yeah, no. There's exemptions for all that stuff. So the point that I want to make is, what year are we in?
2026.
2026. And we still have things as basic as in our schools, you have mandating that you have to have a active assailant response plan.
Yeah, that shouldn't have had to be mandated in the first place.
That's right. And second, that should have been mandated in early 2000.
Yeah.
Right. If you're going to make mandates, solve the problem. Don't just say, oh, it's crazy. If there's a school out there that doesn't have emergency operations plans, give me a call and I will send some to you.
He will. He'll do it.
It's available and it's simple. And then you have to figure out a program of how you're going to drill them and exercise them and so forth. This was part of the conversation that Ethan and I had earlier. It is strange that we have this huge divide in higher education and the K-12 environment. The K-12 environment has all of these mandates around emergency plans, drills, etc. They have all of these. There's still not enough. And the only reason there's not enough is because our schools have been allowed to not do things unless there's a mandate. So until there's mandates, our schools typically don't do something. I've had this conversation, and anyone who wants to argue with me can do so. Now, I'm saying every school, but as an industry in and of itself, the school K-12 industry doesn't hold people accountable to that level of expectation. So there's lots of mandates in the K-12 space. And then you go into the higher education space, there are also mandates, but they're not the same mandates, right?
They're always a little bit different.
They're a little bit different and they don't cover the same things. There's not the drills. There's not the requirement as we're seeing in Florida. There's not the requirement for having the basic emergency operation plans in place. They have notification stuff, and that was, I think, all out of, I think it was Virginia Tech, because there was no notification when Virginia Tech shooting occurred. I think it was in 2006 or so. There wasn't an ability to notify all of the other students that something was happening, right? So that was part of the Clery Act, is making that
Are you
those
telling me
notifications.
situational awareness is a good thing?
But that being said, there's so many things that the world knows today, but nobody's acting on it. Why? Because there's not a mandate. Nobody told me I have to. You have to. Kelly just said you have to. This is almost negligence at this point. If you're not protecting these kids, and I say there's always this weird way that we treat college students. And I call them transitional adults because in certain circumstances, we treat them as adults. And usually when we do that, it's to the detriment of that person. We also treat them as kids. They're our kids. We have to protect them. And then you say, okay, protect them. Well, they're adults. So treating them as children and saying that they're adults, but they need to be protected, and then you're not going to protect them because they're adults, is not helping anybody. And we can go back over the school shootings and many, many higher education cases and active assailants, because there's been several without firearms, that we can say, why is this taking you guys so long? And some of it, I will tell you, is political. And when I say political, I don't mean the traditional political side of it. It is the impression that if I have to do this, I have a problem and it's going to impact my enrollment. And I've seen that play out firsthand. the shooting that I was involved with, the school that had all of the victims tried to distance themselves from that incident very, very quickly.
Right, because
And all of the students that
not
were
a lot of people want to go to a college that had that happen.
That was after it wasn't on school property. Never mind that it was literally 100 feet, maybe a couple 100 feet from campus. They were all students of the school, with the exception of the assailant. So, but they distanced themselves very, very quickly. I told you a few months before that shooting, it was actually just like a month or so before that shooting, we had a riot in that same town, and with college kids. And the school had officers, their university police department had people there. The next operation that we had with them, they refused to work with the sheriff's office, and we had to assign them. They provided assistance, but they restricted what they could do, and we had to put them somewhere where we'd be very unlikely to have any issues.
That always works out when no one wants to work together.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, on a somewhat lighter note, the last article I got for you before we dive into my topic I want to talk about today, as crazy as this is, an elementary school suspended an 8-year-old.
We didn't talk about this one, did we?
Nope. This is a surprise one.
All right. 8-year-old?
An 8-year-old got suspended for bringing in a keychain-sized toy gun made out of Lego parts.
Lego parts. Yeah, I saw this.
So personally, like, what? I think that's a lot. I think the reaction might have been a little too
severe.
Much.
Yeah.
Like,
this
8 years old it's Lego. Like, I understand that, like, maybe, okay, the way that the shape of the Legos were formed, like, again, this is what you talked about. It's like, maybe you go up to me, hey, why did you make that? What caused you to make that?
When I saw that, I did see that article.
Like, to just instantly suspend, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
so there's common sense here, right?
Yeah.
And this is the inability for somebody to, and this gets back into my problem with decision matrices, however I'm supposed to say that.
Well, so that's kind of what it talks about. It talks about, like, technically, according to their policies, it like protects them on, like, oh, I did the right thing because according to policy, they brought in a gun-shaped thing. And it's
right?
Like, okay, but, like, it's made out of Lego parts. It's pretty easy to look at and go, it's Lego.
Yep. And so the problem here is that the policy probably says that if anyone brings any sort of firearm to campus, they get suspended.
Yes.
Zero tolerance. And the problem is that they didn't define what a firearm was, right? Or a weapon.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
because that's the ability for that to fire or harm somebody is the same as taking all of those pieces of that Lego and throwing it at somebody. The same level of danger is there, right? So, but you're right. Let's talk about this. Let's tell the kid why that's incorrect, and let's find out why he thought this was a good idea. And then we can figure that out. I go back to the pathway to violence. The pathway to violence is not necessarily to, this is going to sound bad, not necessarily to stop a threat. It's to find out, one, whether or not there is a threat.
Mm-hmm.
If so, what the level is. And depending on the level, what is the appropriate intervention?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
How do I de-escalate this?
You want to de-escalate it. You want to be able to intervene in a successful manner in which you can remove that person from the pathway to violence, or at least stop them where they're at. Right? And so when you start talking about this and what they're doing, is there a threat? Probably not. But if you delve into it deeper and the kid is trying to see if anyone will react to that.
Yeah.
Right?
See how far he can push it.
And to see how far he can push it, right?
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about an 8-year-old. The developmental stage of an 8-year-old is not that advanced.
I mean, on the other hand, we just talked about that article about the 6-year-old that tried to teach us. So
when I was a kid, we had end of the school year activities, many of which were water involved, right? Because it's warm, you're starting to get into summer. So they want to have these little pre-summer events to keep everyone happy. They don't want to do any work because you can't keep the attention of the kids. So there were times that we had squirt gun fights.
Yeah.
Right.
I got something to add on to that too when you're done.
So you would have the ability to go around spraying people. And the reason I bring this up is, are you going to suspend somebody for a squirt gun? I don't know. It depends on the circumstances. But the reality is there is zero difference between a squirt gun and a spray bottle.
Right.
So
functionally, they're the same.
Same. That's right. And do you know that a squirrel is a rodent? But so are mice and rats.
Yes.
We go after mice and rats much more aggressively than we do squirrels. The impact's the same. They ruin houses. They go into attics. They ruin electrical stuff. But functionally, they're the same. So we have to look at, okay, again, I'm going to say, let's look at it. But if it's dude that is, when I was a kid, and I know this is for a fact still happens today, almost every boy configures something that is not meant to be a firearm into a firearm.
I mean, geez, we go outside and pick up a stick and go
stick.
Look.
Yeah, stick, a mop, a broom, a shovel handle, whatever. And they're going bang, 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 bang. So
someday we're gonna get some psychologists on here to tell us why that is.
We live in a gun culture, right? As much as people are anti-gun, what are generally the biggest box office producers in?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
It's violence and guns.
I mean, yeah, what is a movie without some type of action and shooting bad guys or something, you know?
Right. Yep. What are we fascinated with in reality TV? Violence and murder.
Bad boys. What you gonna do?
Right. There's something to be said there. And the point being is do we use common sense there and say, this doesn't apply? Maybe there was another reason to suspend them, but to just go and say, my hands are tied. This is a gun, and I have to suspend this kid for 8 days or whatever is not doing your job either. Right? Because if you are in fact doing that and there is zero follow-up to correct that behavior, the suspension itself rarely works.
Right. It's just like a slap on the wrist.
The kid doesn't understand. The mom's
like, oh, sweet, I don't have to go to school for a couple of days. Awesome.
Right. The mom's pissed because it's going to go on his permanent record, suspended for bringing a gun to school.
That's crazy.
Right?
That's crazy if that's what it reads.
What's you telling me that's what it's going to read? What's the reason for the discipline? Bringing Legos to school?
I mean, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Right? So that's why this is such a big deal. That's why it hit the news, is because
oh my goodness,
you've taken this 8-year-old and said he brought a gun to school. That's the policy that nobody's going to go back and read that entire report, because what do they think when they say violation of bringing a gun to school policy?
Well, I mean, you think of an actual gun operating firearm. Yeah.
Not plastic Legos. They were
not a small keychain that's shaped like a gun that's made out of Legos.
So
wow.
That's why I hate decision matrix, because somebody who doesn't want to do the right thing, they know that the policy's wrong, but they say, I have to do this. And they don't look at the whole picture. They don't look at the circumstances and say, well, maybe this doesn't really reach the level of the policy being enforced.
It's like, you got to think like too in the future, like as this kid gets older, like, is he always going to be like painted as like the kid that brought a gun to school? Like, how does that affect the kid psychologically and mentally in his future? You could be redirecting this kid completely.
Everyone knows.
Like, what the heck?
I don't care who you are and how good of an administrator you are. Kids know what happened. I knew that kids were suspended for fights that I never saw, right? And this was before social media and the access to information that we have currently. And that's what mom's upset about. right? Mom's
Mhm.
upset that this is going to follow him all the way through. He brought a toy, and a toy that probably left the house in pieces. And somebody said, hey, if I do this, oh, look, it kind of looks like a gun. But this does illustrate the difficulties and the nuances of safety.
Mm.
You can't just have a policy that covers everything. And somebody's going, well, that kind of looks like a gun. That wasn't the intent of the policy. The policy was to keep guns out of school, weapons out of schools. It wasn't meant, unless you have, don't bring toys to school, which I get that. I totally get that. But then suspend them for bringing a toy to school, not bringing a weapon to school.
Right. That's good. That would read differently on the record.
Right.
Right. So the thing I was going to add into that was there's actually a school local to me that the principal sent out a message, it looked like an email, to all the parents and said, hey, I realized that the what they call this like silent assassin game that the seniors play, and they come in, I think it was
water guns.
With water guns.
They're water guns.
And they go and they play this game of whoever it is that's the assassin. They go and, shoot some person with water. And they said, he basically said, don't do this because it just, I don't want it to get out of hand. So I'm not allowing them to do it.
Yeah. So but there's also the potential there, right? Because they're using actual water guns. And I forgot that they're doing that, but that
things actually have like detail to them or whatever, but they're gonna have an orange
whatever
thing on the end. But I'm pretty sure they do that with water guns, right?
We got in trouble, not specifically, but there was a similar message sent to a bunch of us, sort of anonymous. It was from the school, my college. We were playing this game called Assassin, but it would shoot these little rubber pellets. Little rubber balls. It was a spring loaded, so it never hurt. But it was just a little pink, and it go pop. You would know you got hit, but it wouldn't even leave a red mark. But we did it outdoors, weekends, sometimes if it was a weekday, it was at night after school hours and stuff. But some people saw what we were doing, and then they started doing it in class. And so that was deemed disruptive. This was long before active violence in schools were even a thing. I mean, technically they were a thing, but nobody really knew about them. But we would have these full-on, in our dorms, we would ambush that. We had a group of people who were Dungeons and Dragons participants. That's not what we called them, but
yeah, we all knew what you were going to say, Kelly.
I'm sure you did. But they, at times, would dress up in full suits of body armor that they pieced together out of
cardboard
aluminum.
No, aluminum. Wow, full out aluminum, huh?
They're and wow. You hear them clanking up the stairs and in the hallways. And we'd all get together and we'd start ambushing them in the stairwells and stuff. But it was all after hours and so forth, so it wasn't disruptive. And when I saw this assassin game going on, and it's pretty popular, to me it seemed like, all right, this is more than, because people were doing it. I've seen clips of people doing it in class at sporting events while they're like cheerleaders, while they're performing at a sporting event, those types of things where they can't defend themselves. But it's those types of things. Are we suspending those kids? I don't know.
Still seems kind of harsh to me, but I think you could just take the water gun away and call it a day.
Well, I mean, you can obviously educate them, right? You can educate the 8-year-old. Hey, probably not the smartest thing to do. Technically, this might be a violation of policy, but I get it. Let's not see this again. Call mom and dad. Hey, this is what we got. Any issues? What's going on? Can you have a talk with your son of how inappropriate this is? Next time's a different story.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll talk shortly about the next thing. So I'll start off with this. So for, I don't know what, it's been, I think probably a couple years now that we, Crisis Go, we've been promoting ourselves as like a unified platform. And I mean, I'm just gonna say, our marketing team understood that was like a good message. We're like, this is solid. I like this. Apparently, it was so good that other people are starting to copy us. But there's a difference, and this is the other thing we've been talking about too. Another message that I like that we did recently was the built, not bought. Right. So I just want to quickly talk about the differences between what a unified platform means within a company that's actually built all of their products, and then a company that is promoting a unified platform that's purchased their products. And I was like really, really thinking about this, and it made me laugh because I'm like, wait a minute, this is almost like a Left of Bang thing, right? So stick with me here.
I'm going to have to.
So ready? Think of Bang as the moment that the user uses the product. Okay, that is when you give it to them. I'm trying to think of the most simple way I could say this. When you have a company that is building these things from the ground up internally from the same company, it's all on the left side, right? You have the, years of development, and then you have that moment where we give it to you. You get it after it's been developed. And of course, there's going to be updates and stuff afterwards, based on, customer input and stuff. But like the core parts of it are going to be done. Right? We call that a minimal viable product, right? So you're going to have access to it at that point. When you have a company that is purchasing products and saying, we have a unified thing, you're getting it at the beginning of that, and then it's taking actual years after the fact to actually get those all parts to actually communicate fully together. Like at some point they could get them to actually share data like seamlessly and stuff, but they're already introducing it to you as a unified platform when it's actually not. So that's one way of saying it. I have some other things I can say to this.
So there's a difference between a suite of products and a unified platform. That means you can have a bunch of different products that do different things, and they address all of your problems with the exception of one. Do they work together? And this is what happens when you have and I'm going to get some pushback on this. When you have an uneducated market, somebody says, I want this product. And so you provide them that. And they say, well, do you have visitor management? No. Do you have this? Nope. So at some point, they realize they're losing deals based upon not having those products. So they go out and they buy a product so that the next time somebody asks that question, and when I say buy that product, they buy the company that built that product. And so they buy the product, and now they have visitor management, they have a tip line or whatever, right? They have these products, but they weren't designed to work together, but they have them. And the other aspect of this is sometimes they buy a product because it does two things, like visitor management. And if somebody comes in, it alerts that some prohibited person's trying to gain access to your building. But that alert doesn't integrate with your alerting system. So now you're managing two different systems, right? So that's one problem. The other problem comes in when you buy those products, you don't always buy the services or the engineers that built that product.
Yeah, most of the time they get laid off
or whatever, right?
Yeah. So then you have the existing engineers trying to figure out what the heck the other engineers did to make the product.
Right. And
that's the years after that I was talking about.
Well, oftentimes they can't figure it out.
Yeah.
And they don't have the institutional knowledge or the evolutional knowledge of the products and how they were originally built. So they have a difficult time making them all work together. And many times they'll have a simple bridge or something, and it doesn't work as well because it wasn't ever designed to work as a trigger for access control or what have you, right? So that's where you come into this issue. A unified platform allows you to say, okay, I see this need, so I build it. I see another need, So I build it. And when I build it, since I know I built the other one, the way the other one was built, I can make sure that they're integrated seamlessly because I'm the one that created the first one. So I'm the one that creates the second one and the third one, et cetera, so that they all are integrated. And even if they're not initially initiated or integrated from the beginning, you know that they're going to be at some point. So you built in the structure of the bridge on both sides and how they connect, how that bridge is connected, and how the mapping occurs, right? So what fields need to be filled out, what data needs to be sent, who needs what. And that way you not only can make sure that the people who need the information get it, but you can limit and permission those people who are eligible to get that information, as opposed to here's a group, they're administrators, right? Here, everyone's going to get it. I don't want these administrators to have it, but I want these administrators to have it, or I want this person to know about it. They may not be able to drill down into that. Right? So the key to a unified platform is it unifies, right? It doesn't just function. It unifies and it brings so when you have an incident, there are so many things going off at a single time. It's not just step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6. That's not the way it works. You have, even in the structure,
this going on and this going on and this going on, they're all happening like simultaneously. And
right. So let me illustrate that. So in the incident command structure, you have an incident commander. You have the command staff. Then you have 4 sections. You have operations, planning and intel, logistics, and the finance and or administrative position. So you have 5 different sections. So without doing anything else, you have 5 things going on at one time. You have your command staff, you have your 4 sections. They're all doing something different because they all have a different role, responsibility, and functionality, right? Within each of those sections, they have many times, even though they have 2 or 3 primary objectives, they have hundreds of tasks that are going on, right? And the need to understand where that data goes and who gets that data is crucial when you have a unified platform. If you had a platform that does just operations, so in our cases, a panic button is an operational button, right? But is it addressing planning and intel? Probably not, right? Now, situational awareness helps with planning and intel and decision making. That helps operations. A unified platform has logistics, where staging is, where triage is. How do I get the resources that I need? How do I track those resources? That's all through logistics. And recording the events helps with the admin finance side of things. So if you don't have a system, if you have a system that does just 1, just 2, just 3, you're back to where you started. You're all in silos. You can't help each other. The data is not being shared. And if the data is not being shared, I can't make good decisions as an incident commander. I just can't. I can make the best decision I have with the information I have, but I understand that there's a flaw I have to understand that there's a flaw in the data that I'm getting. So I make the best decisions I can with the data that I have, but I also have to realize that if I'm going to an operational data provider, I'm only making my decision based upon the silo of data that I get from that platform. So the key word here is unifying. It has to be unifying to be a unified platform. And we are not seeing that with many of our competitors. That we called it collectors versus builders in the past. Because we had people that were collecting these different products and saying, oh, yep, we have it. But they weren't connected. They weren't unified in any way. Do we have this? Yes. Do we have the ability to do this? Yes. But it's with a third party, right? So deliver information that meets Alyssa's law, they have to send it to a third party first. Almost instantaneous, but it's somebody, they have to rely on another product or a partner to get that information there.
So what does that happen with the speed of the alert then?
It may do it a little slower, but not much. It'd be
Not much?
negligible. But the problem is you add another potential failure point, right?
Okay.
So, and
Good point.
oftentimes, we've talked about this a little bit, and it probably is worth talking a little bit about it right now. And that is the way information is received right now by your 911 center is through the data of the 911 call. And so Alyssa's law requires that you make that phone call, you have that panic button, and it delivers that data. And the data is generally what is available on your cell phone. It's a little different, but not much. And that is the location of the incident, where the panic button was. It's a little bit different than a cell phone because cell phones have a difficult time inside unless they're attached to Wi-Fi or what have you. GPS has a hard time inside. But the ability to know what's happening and where it's happening so that law enforcement can get to that problem. That's kind of where Alyssa's law stops. Now, I will say that there are states that are pushing that a little bit further down the road and adding stuff, but we'll stick with the Alyssa's law. Alyssa's law doesn't require a continual flow of information, and it settles on what essentially is old technology. And some people have been very successful with capitalizing on that. But the fact of the matter is
you say things so much better than I do.
The ability to know how dynamic a situation is and how rapidly that changes is critical. So, and we pride ourselves that we not only meet Alyssa's law, we exceed it. And we look at the whole picture, not just after something starts, like panic button companies that deal with primarily panic buttons. At first, it was just panic buttons. You need a panic button. Okay. And then things started happening and they said, well, you have to be able to communicate with the sender of that, right? The team, not the sender, the building. So they put a quick little app that has a message group on it that we've been doing for 13 years, right?
Yeah.
And they started working through all of these different issues, and they would buy a company or they would do something to say, yep, we meet Alyssa's law. And I'm not saying they don't, but they, like many of the mandates, people meet the minimum. I've talked to people with Alyssa's law, but I haven't really sat down and had a huge conversation with them. But I would venture to say the intent of the law exceeds what the mandate is.
Yes.
The intent is, I need you to be able to press a button, contact whoever it is that can solve my problem, the reason for pressing that button, send them to the location of that problem as quickly as they can with the best information available to them as quickly as possible so they can solve my problem as quickly as possible. Getting them to an active violent situation with this assumption that because they pressed a button that they know what's happening there is a false, I don't know what you call it, false sense of security or a false idea that your problem is going to be solved. Because as a relatively long time in law enforcement, there are very few calls that end up the way they started.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is very few calls that we got, emergency calls that said, you have X going on, respond to this address. And when you get there, it was exactly what X was, right? So we always take this first assumption, oh, it's this, because that's the call classification. But there are so many different aspects of what could be there that change what the actual outcome is substantially. So knowing that, every time you press a panic button, you're going to make this assumption that it's an act of violence, probably an active shooter. But if that's all you get, you're going to get there and you're going to sit for a second or two, literally, and say, what do I see? What's going on? What are the reactions of everybody? You're looking for indicators. You're trying to figure that out. And I'm not here to give you any false sense that at some point that deputy or police officer is going to look and say, they're going to start reading this app, because they're not going to do that. They're going to see what's happening. But without that information being available to them, nobody else can do that either. Right? So there's a lot of mandates out there that say you have to have a map of your school, right? What's the intent of that? The intent of that is so that when you have a first responder who's never been at your school before, they can look and see where to go and how to get there. But with just a map, there's nothing on that map that says where the shooter is.
Yeah, where the alert was or anything like that.
Unless you have where the panic button is, because the panic button's likely going to be closest to where the shooter is. Likely, not always.
Yeah.
If you don't have that information available to you, and I'm not saying that the cop's going to, with a map, he's going to look there and say, oh, here we go. Here's my map. I'm going to go through this and take a left at this hallway and do that. They're going to listen for shots being fired, panicked people running, screaming, all these different indicators that could be going on. But at some point, if somebody says, okay, they got enough people in there, or me as a emergency dispatcher, I can go and say, this is the information that I'm seeing. I'm hearing I'm seeing on the messages that are coming in. It looks like they're in room 200, or they're in the hallway near the West Wing, right? Or they're near the cafeteria, right? Because you may end up there and there be a lull in the activity. But if somebody and the first responding officers are looking for and trying to look at the indicators, and your dispatcher is feeding them information, they don't have to look at the app, but at least your dispatchers have that information and they can do that. Or your supervisor who was on the other side of town, instead of responding right to it, he pulls over and pulls up the app or the website and says, hey, this is the information I'm seeing. I need somebody to go here. And he or she starts directing it from that spot. They can get some control over it much quicker. They have the ability to get decision driving data. I don't know of anyone else who has that. In fact, our feature now is we have a patent pending on that. We're likely close to the only people that have that. That's a long process, but our process is pending the approval of that application. We'll see where it goes.
Good stuff.
Yep. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Ethan?
I think it did, in a very long-winded way.
Sorry.
Oh, good. I'll leave the audience with this. When you're looking at a platform, all I need you to ask is, are you truly unified or are you Frankenstein? I want you to ask that question and see the answer that you get.
And I will tell you this. If you have a truly unified platform, you have different available products that are essentially plug and play into your platform. So it's future ready.
Yes.
Right. So oftentimes, we have, I don't know the number, let's say 8 products. I think that's
eight core. Yes.
8 core products. And they have a bunch of features in each one. But you don't have to buy all 8 at one time. Buy what you need, knowing that when you determine you have the means and the need, buy the next one.
It's literally as easy as going click,
turn a button
on.
A lot of times there's some training involved with that, obviously,
sure,
right? But sometimes to get it activated, it is as simple as turning on a button. I'm not going to say future proof, but it's certain future resilient.
Yeah, it's a good word to use.
So there you go.
There you go. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.